The church was quiet except for the faint creak of wooden pews and the soft hum of the organ. A gentle drizzle tapped against the stained glass windows, blurring the gray afternoon light into muted colors. Nina Roberts, 32, stood at the front, her black dress clinging to her as though it shared the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the framed photograph of Michael, her husband, the man who had been her anchor in a world that never welcomed them together. The funeral director gave her a sympathetic glance, but sympathy from strangers felt both kind and cruel. What stung the most was the absence, rows of empty seats where her family should have been. Not a single familiar face. No mother holding her hand, no father offering a silent nod of strength, no sister whispering that everything would be okay. Instead, they had chosen Rachel's engagement party, where champagne flowed and laughter replaced mourning. Nina's phone vibrated against her palm, the screen flashing a name she both longed for and dreaded. Mother. With hesitant fingers she opened the message. For words glared back at her in cold detachment. We need to talk now. No condolences, no acknowledgement of Michael's death. Only a demand, as though her grief were an inconvenience to be brushed aside. Her throat tightened and for a moment she wondered if she might collapse. Michael's absence was unbearable enough, but to be left alone by those who had raised her, who were supposed to stand beside her in life's darkest hours, cut deeper than any blade. Around her, Michael's colleagues, neighbors, and a few old friends filled the silence with whispered prayers. They spoke to her kindly, patted her shoulders and told her how much he had meant to them. Yet none of it eased the hollowness where her family's love should have been. As the priest began the eulogy, Nina closed her eyes. The words blurred into echoes and she could only think of Michael's smile, the smile that had once promised her that no matter how cruel the world became, she would never be alone. Now that promise lay beneath the coffin at her feet, and she faced the unbearable truth. Even in death, Michael had been abandoned by the people who claimed to be hers. And so had she. When the service ended, Nina lingered, staring at the last flowers laid upon his casket. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming insistently as though the sky itself mourned in her family's place. She pressed her phone against her chest, her mother's cold message burning into her heart like a scar. Whatever her family wanted from her, she knew one thing for certain. This was not grief shared. It was grief endured, alone. Nina's memories of Michael often came to her in fragments. Snapshots of laughter, late-night talks, and the warmth of his hand resting over hers. They had met in their sophomore year of college at a volunteer event for underprivileged children. While Nina struggled to organize supplies, a tall young man with kind eyes and an easy smile stepped in to help her. He carried boxes effortlessly, making light jokes that eased her nerves, and when their eyes met she felt a spark she couldn't explain. That man was Michael Roberts, a mechanical engineering major who was passionate about creating sustainable solutions for everyday problems. Unlike many of Nina's classmates who flaunted their wealth and ambition, Michael was grounded, compassionate, and endlessly curious. He talked about designing affordable medical devices for rural hospitals, not luxury cars or stock portfolios. His background was humble. His father worked long shifts at a factory and his mother ran a small bakery, but his integrity, intelligence, and quiet determination shone brighter than any social status ever could. Nina's heart had chosen him long before her mind dared to admit it. He was the first person who truly saw her, not as the daughter of a prominent businessman, not as Rachel's sister, not as the girl expected to marry into prestige, but as herself. Michael never asked her to be anything other than who she was. He listened when she doubted herself, challenged her when she needed strength, and loved her with a steadiness she had never known at home. But their love story was shadowed by resistance. From the beginning, Nina's family made their disapproval painfully clear. Her mother's smile would tighten every time Michael's name came up, her father would change the subject, and Rachel would scoff openly, saying things like, You could do so much better than someone who spends his weekends fixing bikes for neighborhood kids. Family dinners became battlegrounds. Nina endured passive-aggressive remarks about wasting her time and lowering her standards. At first, Jessica, her childhood best friend, seemed supportive, encouraging Nina to follow her heart. Yet even Jessica's enthusiasm dimmed whenever Rachel was around, leaving Nina feeling as though she were fighting this battle on her own. Still, despite the criticism, Nina and Michael's love only grew stronger. They studied together in the library until dawn, shared cheap pizza in cramped apartments, and dreamed about building a life where kindness mattered more than money. When the weight of her family's expectations pressed down on her, Michael would take her hand and whisper, "It's you and me, Nina. That's all that matters." And she believed him. Against prejudice, against pressure, against the shallow judgments of those closest to her, Nina chose love. And for years that choice became her greatest source of happiness. Their wedding was not the grand affair Nina's parents had once envisioned for her. There were no crystal chandeliers, no orchestra, no guest list filled with wealthy acquaintances. Instead, it was held in the small garden of a cozy inn near campus, a place where Michael and Nina had often gone for coffee and long conversations. Strings of white lights hung across the trees, and wildflowers, hand-picked that morning, filled simple glass jars on each table. It was not extravagant, but it was theirs. Every detail reflected the love they had built together. Humble, authentic, and full of hope. Nina remembered the way Michael looked at her when she walked down the aisle, his eyes brimming with tears, as if she were the most extraordinary sight he had ever seen. That gaze alone was worth more than any diamond centerpiece her family could have afforded. For a moment she felt like the luckiest woman alive. But reality intruded quickly. Though her family had reluctantly agreed to attend, their disapproval hung in the air like a storm cloud. Her mother sat stiffly in the front row, lips pursed so tightly they seemed carved from stone. Her father avoided eye contact with Michael entirely, as if by ignoring him he could erase the marriage. And Rachel, dressed in a designer gown far flashier than Nina's simple lace dress, muttered snide comments to anyone within earshot. "Can you believe this? It feels more like a backyard barbecue than a wedding," she sneered, loud enough for Nina to hear. Jessica, Nina's supposed best friend, shifted uneasily between roles. At times she offered Nina a reassuring smile, but whenever Rachel pulled her aside, Jessica's expression hardened, as though she were embarrassed to be seen enjoying herself. By the end of the night, it was clear to Nina that Jessica's loyalty leaned toward Rachel, the sister who could offer her status and connections, rather than the bride who had trusted her since childhood. Yet even as whispers of judgment echoed around her, Nina focused on Michael. His hand squeezed hers throughout the ceremony, grounding her, reminding her that what they were building together was real. When they exchanged vows they had written themselves, Michael's voice was steady, promising her a love that would not falter no matter how much the world turned against them. The reception was filled with laughter from Michael's side of the family, who embraced Nina with open arms. They brought homemade dishes, clapped to the music, and toasted the couple with heartfelt warmth. Their joy contrasted sharply with the cold politeness of Nina's parents, who left early, claiming other commitments. Rachel and Jessica disappeared with them, not bothering to say goodbye. As the night came to an end, Nina sat beside Michael under the string lights, her head resting on his shoulder. The absence of her family's love stung deeply, but Michael's arms around her reminded her of the truth. Family could be chosen, and love, true love, was worth every sacrifice. Life with Michael was not perfect, but it was theirs, and it was filled with a kind of joy Nina had never experienced in her parents' home. Their apartment was modest, tucked away on the third floor of an aging brick building, with creaky wooden floors and a balcony that overlooked a bustling street. Michael would brew coffee every morning before work, leaving little notes on the kitchen counter. "Good luck with your meeting today," or "Don't forget you're the most beautiful woman in the room." Nina, in turn, packed his lunch, slipping in his favorite chocolate whenever she knew he had a long day ahead. They celebrated victories in the smallest ways. Cooking dinner together after getting their first promotion, sharing a bottle of cheap wine when they managed to pay off a loan, dancing in the living room when Michael finished designing his first project at the firm. Their happiness wasn't built on wealth or status but on partnership, trust, and laughter. Yet family gatherings were another world entirely. Whenever Nina brought Michael along to holiday dinners or birthdays, the warmth of their daily life was replaced by cold scrutiny. Her mother would raise an eyebrow at Michael's modest suit, asking with feigned politeness, "So, how's work at, what was it again? That small engineering company?" Her father would nod distractedly, clearly uninterested, before turning to Rachel with glowing pride. "And you, sweetheart, tell us again about that big client of yours." Impressive. Rachel thrived under the spotlight. Every accomplishment of hers, a promotion, a new luxury apartment, an invitation to an exclusive gala, was celebrated as if she were royalty. Meanwhile, anything Nina or Michael achieved was brushed aside as insignificant. When Nina once mentioned a successful project she had led at work, her father interrupted, "That's nice, but Rachel just signed a deal with an international firm. Isn't that something?" Jessica, once Nina's confidant, became another voice in the chorus of subtle contempt. She laughed at Rachel's sarcastic remarks about Nina's ordinary life, rarely defending her friend. Instead, she seemed eager to stay aligned with the sister who carried social prestige. Through it all, Michael remained Nina's steadfast support. Under the table, he would squeeze her hand whenever her parents' words cut too deeply. After these gatherings, as soon as they were home, he would hold her close and whisper, "They don't define you, Nina. We do. Our life is ours and it's beautiful." And she believed him. In the quiet moments, when they shared Sunday mornings reading on the balcony, or laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks over burnt pancakes, Nina knew their happiness was real, even if her family refused to see it. The day the doctor spoke the words "Stage 4 terminal," was the day Nina felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. She sat in the sterile white room, clutching Michael's hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin, as if her grip alone could keep him tethered to life. Michael, ever calm even in the face of devastation, simply nodded, asking the doctor practical questions about treatment timelines and pain management. Nina, however, could barely breathe. The thought of losing him was unthinkable. For the first few weeks, Jessica appeared at Nina's side. She sent flowers, offered to drive Nina to appointments, and even spent a few evenings sitting quietly in the hospital, flipping through magazines to pass the time. Nina clung to that presence, grateful that at least one person from her past seemed to care. But as Michael's condition worsened and the reality of endless hospital visits and difficult conversations set in, Jessica's visits grew less frequent. Her excuses multiplied. "I have a work deadline, Rachel needs me for something, I'll come next week, I promise." Soon her texts dwindled into silence. Nina's parents were even colder. When she called them to explain the diagnosis, her mother sighed, her voice brisk and impatient. "That's terrible, dear, but what can we possibly do? We're very busy right now with Rachel's engagement preparations." Her father added only a quiet, detached, "I'm sorry," before passing the phone back. No offers of help. No visits. No compassion. To them, Michael's illness was not a family tragedy. It was an inconvenience. In stark contrast, Michael's family rallied around him. His mother arrived almost daily with home-cooked meals, determined that her son would never face a hospital tray alone. His younger sister decorated his hospital room with photos, drawings from neighborhood kids, and bright flowers that softened the clinical atmosphere. Old college friends took turns sitting with him through chemo sessions, telling jokes to distract him from the nausea. They filled the room with warmth and laughter, creating a bubble of love that Nina's own family never even attempted to offer. Nina became Michael's constant companion, never leaving his side for more than a few hours at a time. She learned how to track his medications, how to soothe him when the pain grew unbearable, how to smile even when her heart was breaking. Every night she crawled into the narrow hospital bed beside him, whispering stories about the future they had once planned, the house they would have bought, the trips they would have taken, clinging to hope even as time slipped through her fingers. In those months, Nina discovered both the fragility and the strength of love. Michael's body grew weaker, but his spirit remained her anchor. Whenever she wept, he brushed her tears away and murmured, "Promise me you'll keep living, Nina. Even when I can't be here." And though her own family had turned their backs, Nina knew she was not completely alone. Michael's family and friends surrounded them with the kind of love her parents had never given. It was a bittersweet revelation. Sometimes the truest family is not the one you are born into, but the one you find along the way. By the time Michael could no longer walk without help, Nina had already memorized every sound of his struggle. The shallow breaths in the night, the muffled groans he tried to hide, the way his once strong hands trembled when he reached for a glass of water. The cancer had spread ruthlessly, and no amount of medication seemed enough to soften the edges of his pain. Yet as Nina watched the love of her life fading, her family's world spun on as if nothing had changed. Her mother called one evening, her voice full of giddy excitement, not sorrow. "Darling, wonderful news, Rachel is engaged. Bradford proposed at the Four Seasons last night. He's a corporate lawyer, very successful. You must come to the engagement party. It's going to be spectacular, champagne fountains, a live band, the works." Nina sat there in stunned silence, her gaze fixed on Michael, who lay pale and exhausted in the hospital bed beside her. The disconnect was staggering. "Mom," Nina whispered, her voice breaking, "Michael's condition is worsening. He's moving into hospice care soon. Please, can you just come? Even once. He needs you. I need you." Her mother's tone hardened as though Nina were being unreasonable. "Nina, you can't expect us to abandon Rachel's happiness right now. It's her moment. Michael's situation is sad, of course, but what difference would it make if we came? You've chosen your path and now Rachel deserves her joy." The words cut so deeply that Nina could barely speak. When she turned to her father for support, he only muttered something about being too busy with work. Rachel never answered Nina's calls at all. Jessica, once her best friend, echoed the same excuses. "You know how important this engagement is for Rachel. I'll visit when things settle down," she promised, though Nina had already stopped believing her. The day Michael was transferred to hospice, Nina sent one last desperate message to her mother. "Please. He doesn't have much time. Come say goodbye before it's too late." The reply came an hour later, short and cruel in its dismissal. "We can't. Don't pressure us." Nina stood by Michael's bedside as the nurses adjusted his her phone slipping from her hand, tears blurring her vision. She realized then that the family she had begged for comfort would never come. They had already erased Michael from their lives, just as they had tried to erase her choice to love him. And so, as the world outside celebrated Rachel's glittering future, Nina held Michael's fragile hand, choosing love in the shadow of death, even when her own flesh and blood chose absence. Michael's final breath came in the stillness of dawn. The hospice room was quiet, the air heavy with antiseptic and grief. Nina had been holding his hand through the night, whispering words of love, prayers and memories into the silence. When his chest finally stilled, she felt her own heart fracture, as though the world itself had collapsed around her. For a moment there was only emptiness, a silence louder than any scream. She made the calls she dreaded most. Her mother answered with a flat tone, offering a perfunctory, "I'm sorry to hear that, dear," before quickly adding, "But you do understand Rachel's engagement party is tonight. It would be impossible for us to leave at such short notice." Her father didn't even come on the line. Rachel never replied to Nina's messages at all. Jessica's response was no better. Once Nina's closest friend, she sent a brief text, "I'm so sorry, Nina. I wish I could be there, but you know how important tonight is for Rachel. I'll come by another time. Another time. As though Michael's funeral were an errand that could be rescheduled. On the day of the service, the chapel felt cavernous. Michael's colleagues filled several rows, as did neighbors and friends from his childhood. His mother clutched Nina tightly, weeping uncontrollably, while his sister delivered a trembling eulogy that left everyone in tears. Strangers approached Nina, offering words of comfort, pressing tissues into her hand, holding her when she faltered. But the seats reserved for her family, her parents, her sister Jessica, remained hauntingly empty. Each unoccupied chair felt like a wound, a visible testament to their abandonment. Nina stood at the lectern, her voice shaking as she tried to speak about Michael. She shared how he had loved unconditionally, how he had taught her that compassion was more valuable than wealth. Halfway through, her tears blurred the words on the paper, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. Then from the front row, Michael's mother reached out, her eyes brimming with love, silently lending Nina the strength her own blood relatives had denied her. When the coffin was lowered into the earth, the drizzle turned to rain, cold and relentless. Guests huddled under umbrellas, but Nina stood bareheaded, rain soaking her dress, her grief too vast to be contained. She watched the casket sink into the ground, whispering a final goodbye only the rain could hear. And when the mourners slowly dispersed, she remained, alone in the downpour, staring at the earth that now held the only person who had truly loved her without condition. Her family's absence echoed louder than the storm itself. It was not just Michael she buried that day, but also the last fragile hope that her family might someday choose love over pride. The house was unbearably silent after the funeral. The flowers from Michael's colleagues still lined the kitchen counter, their fragrance both comforting and suffocating. Nina sat alone at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea she couldn't bring herself to drink. Her phone buzzed, a message from Susan, the colleague who had stood by her side at the service. "Nina, you need to see this," the text read. Attached was a video file. Nina hesitated before pressing play. The shaky footage showed a lavish terrace at an upscale hotel. Balloons, champagne glasses, a string quartet playing softly in the background. At the center of it all sat her family, her parents, Rachel and even Jessica, laughing, drinking, celebrating. She turned up the volume. Bradford raised a glass. "To Rachel, the future Mrs. Bradford Hale." Applause followed, glasses clinked. Then her mother's voice cut through, sharp and dismissive. "Nina called last night saying Michael was dying. Right before Rachel's big day. So inconsiderate of her." Laughter erupted around the table. Jessica smirked, leaning toward Rachel, adding, "She always makes everything about herself." Rachel giggled, brushing it off as if Michael's death was nothing more than a poorly timed inconvenience. Nina dropped the phone, her stomach twisting with nausea. Her grief had been mocked, her pleas for compassion treated as a joke. And Jessica, her childhood friend, the person who once held her secrets and dreams, was laughing right along with them. Before she could recover from the shock, another email notification appeared. This time it was from her parents. Attached were legal documents labeled, "Trust Amendment." Her hands trembled as she scanned the pages. Legal jargon blurred into cruelty. Her name was being erased, her portion of the inheritance redirected entirely to Rachel. All that remained was a blank space for her signature. The timing was grotesque. The day after Michael's funeral, her parents wanted her to sign away her rights, as if grief would make her pliable. Rage cut through her sorrow. That evening she drove to her parents' house, the documents in her bag, the video burned into her memory. They greeted her with hollow sympathy, their voices too polished, too rehearsed. Rachel smirked from the sofa, champagne flute in hand, as if she had already won. Jessica was there too, avoiding Nina's eyes. Nina laid the papers on the table. "You wanted me to sign this," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "To give up everything that was meant for me." Her father stiffened. It's for the good of the family. Rachel has greater responsibilities. Nina cut him off. And mocking my husband's death? Laughing about my grief? Was that also for the good of the family? She pulled out her phone and played the video. The room went still as their own voices filled the air, damning them beyond denial. Her mother paled, her hands trembling slightly, but Rachel only rolled her eyes. You're overreacting, Nina. It was just a joke. You've always been so dramatic. Jessica opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but Nina raised her hand to silence her. I stood alone at my husband's funeral. Not one of you cared enough to show up. And now you want to steal from me too? Well, this ends now. For the first time in years she saw fear flicker in her parents' eyes. Not of her but of exposure, of losing control of the narrative they had always dictated. Nina gathered the papers, slid them back into her bag and stood tall. You've already taken enough from me. You won't take my dignity. You won't take what's rightfully mine. I'm done being your scapegoat. She walked out, leaving behind the stunned silence of a family unmasked, their deception laid bare. The confrontation at her parents' home had left Nina shaken but strangely invigorated. For years she had been the quiet daughter, the overlooked sister, the abandoned friend. That night she finally saw the truth. Her silence had been the leash that kept her tethered to them. Now she was ready to sever it for good. Days later her family arrived uninvited at her own house. Rachel strutted in first, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor like a declaration of ownership. Behind her came their parents, faces stiff with false authority, and Jessica, trailing in last with a look of practiced guilt. Nina stood in the living room, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" she asked coldly. Her mother's voice was honeyed, but her eyes gleamed with calculation. "We came to talk. To fix this misunderstanding. Families fight, Nina, but in the end blood matters." Rachel scoffed. "And you're overreacting again. That video? Taken out of context. You always twist things to make yourself the victim." Jessica finally spoke up, her voice small. "Nina, I didn't mean." But Nina raised her hand, silencing them all. She walked to the mantel where Michael's photo stood in a silver frame, his warm smile a reminder of the man who had given her more love in a few short years than her family had in a lifetime. "Do you know what it felt like," she said, her voice steady, "to bury my husband alone? To stand at his grave with no family beside me, while you laughed at Rachel's party? Do you know what that did to me?" Her father shifted uncomfortably. Her mother opened her mouth to protest, but Nina continued, her tone rising with conviction. "You mocked my pain. You erased me from your lives long before Michael died. And Jessica," she turned toward her former friend, "you betrayed the one friendship I thought I could still trust. You all left me with nothing. But now I see, that's my freedom." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh please. Stop acting like a martyr. You're pathetic." Nina took a deep breath, then stepped closer, her eyes locked on Rachel's. "No, Rachel. I'm done being pathetic. I'm done begging for scraps of love from people who never intended to give it. You don't get to come into my home and pretend we're still family." She walked to the front door, opened it wide and pointed outside. "Leave." Her mother's face hardened. "You'll regret this, Nina. Family is all you have." Nina shook her head. "Michael was my family. And the love he gave me is more than I ever got from any of you. I don't need your inheritance. I don't need your approval. And I certainly don't need your cruelty." Rachel muttered something under her breath, but their parents pulled her toward the door. Jessica lingered for a moment, her eyes glistening with shame. "Nina, please. I made mistakes, but Nina's voice was quiet but firm. "You made your choice when you laughed with them. Now I'm making mine. Get out." The door closed behind them with a heavy finality. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was liberating. Nina leaned against the door for a moment, her chest rising and falling as the weight of years slipped off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time the house felt safe. It was hers, filled with the echoes of Michael's laughter and the memories of the love they had built together. She knew grief would still haunt her, that healing wouldn't come overnight. But in that quiet moment she felt a glimmer of peace. No more begging. No more chains. She was free. 2 years passed and Nina's world looked different. Smaller in some ways but richer in the ways that mattered. The deep shadows of grief that once suffocated her had softened into a quiet presence she carried with her, like a scar she no longer tried to hide. Michael's family had become her anchor. Sunday dinners with his parents and siblings turned into a ritual she cherished. They didn't just tolerate her presence. They embraced her as their own. His mother often took Nina's hands and whispered, "You'll always be our daughter no matter what." Those words filled the hollow places her own parents had carved into her heart. Therapy too had been a lifeline. Week after week she confronted the wounds left by her family, years of dismissal, manipulation and silence. Her therapist encouraged her to redefine the word family, to see it not as a birthright but as a bond chosen and nurtured. Slowly, Nina learned that she could build her own circle of belonging, free from those who had once poisoned her sense of worth. Channeling her pain into purpose, Nina began volunteering at the local cancer support center. She sat with patients during chemo sessions, shared coffee with weary caregivers, and spoke candidly about her journey with Michael. Her story, once a source of raw ache, became a lantern for others walking through darkness. More than once, a patient's whispered, "Thank you, I don't feel so alone now," reminded her that her suffering had been transformed into something meaningful. It was during one of those afternoons at the center that Jessica reappeared. Nina saw her standing nervously by the doorway, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers as though they could soften years of betrayal. Jessica's eyes brimmed with unspoken guilt. "Nina," she began softly, "I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to tell you the truth. Rachel's engagement, it fell apart. Bradford was exposed for fraud. He lost everything and so did she." The words hung in the air. Once, Nina might have felt vindicated, might have reveled in the collapse of Rachel's golden facade. But now she only felt a distant detachment. Rachel's downfall no longer defined her healing. It was merely a reminder that superficial lives often crumbled under their own weight. Jessica hesitated, then added, "I should have been there for you. I was weak. I let Rachel pull me in and I abandoned the one person who needed me most. I can't undo it, but I hope someday you'll forgive me." Nina studied her for a long moment. The old ache stirred, but it no longer consumed her. "Forgiveness isn't about you," she said gently. "It's about me. And I've already forgiven you, because I refuse to carry that bitterness any longer. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll let you back into my life the way it was. Boundaries protect me now." Jessica nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She left the flowers on the table and walked away, leaving Nina with a bittersweet sense of closure. That night, as Nina sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she thought of Michael. She imagined his warm hand over hers, his reassuring smile, his voice reminding her she was stronger than she ever believed. She whispered into the twilight, "I'm still carrying you with me. But I'm carrying myself too now." The strength Nina had found wasn't about revenge or even survival. It was about becoming whole on her own terms. She had built a new life, one rooted not in the approval of others but in the quiet power of self-love and chosen connections. For the first time in years, Nina felt unshakably certain. She was free, she was enough, and she was strong beyond all.